A Heretics Gospel, written by Anonymous. Narration and art by Douglas.
Cassandra was never a liar, and precognition is not a gift. John McTavish will die. It will be bloody, brutal, a bullet through the skull, and a scream that never seems to end. You shouldn't know that. Chapter 1. Dr. Harbison needed a better pen. Tucked into the beige faux leather armchair that all psychologists tended to favor, you watched as the good doctor double-backed on her sentence, scratching her pen across the notepad. The noise was loud in a still room, only broken by your mother's frustrated breathing, and the click-clack of the clock pinned above the door. Lemon and lavender-scented cleaner hung in the air. Your heavy eyes traced toward the desk Dr. Harbison sat behind, narrowing slightly on the Clorox wipes left ajar. There was a sheen across the matte finish of her mahogany desk, like she'd rushed to clean before your appointment began. Your attention flicked back to the psychologist when her pen scratched again. Just like Dr. Harbison needed a new pen, you were certain you needed a new psychologist. You weren't sure Dr. Harbison could even be called that. There wasn't a single degree or qualification hanging on the walls, just a crucifix and a picture of her husband. It wasn't even a good picture. Dr. Harbison's bleached hair was tucked into a braid, and her husband's bald head was burned by the African sun behind them. The small child they had posed between them looked starved, holding a cup of water with thin hands. The boy looked like he wanted to cry. It didn't match the smiles donning the Harbisons' faces. You believe your daughter is experiencing hallucinations? Dr. Harbison peeked down at you from beneath her thick brown glasses. Is that correct? Your eye twitched. That was bullshit, and she knew it. Your mouth opened, but your mother cut in before you could find your tongue. Yes, she sees. Her hand fluttered over her chest like a scandalized nun. These beasts! The priest says they're demons, and I'm of mine to believe him. Every night she wakes up screaming. Nightmares. You muttered under your breath. It's just nightmares. Your mother had an awful habit of dramatizing the mundane, and the church only fed it. The power goes out because your father didn't pay the bill on time? The only explanation was that Satan himself had cursed your lineage. Your brother skinned his knee running down the street? Well, he was obviously a sinner. Never mind the fact that he was only 4 years old. God-awful noise, I tell you, your mother continued on like you hadn't spoken. She'd taken to fanning her face now. The university claims it's a hindrance to the other students. We don't know what to do with her. We need help. Your lip curled in annoyance, but you didn't argue. You were 20 years old, and yet your mother still believed she could speak for you. This wouldn't have even been a problem if you hadn't fallen asleep in class the other day. If your professor hadn't heard your screaming, if your roommate hadn't let it slip that they've been dealing with this for months. You'd been so careful. Yet you'd still been caught. After countless appointments with their counselor, your university had been concerned enough about your mental health to get your guardian involved. It wasn't supposed to go that far. It had been a complete accident, a fluke. You tried your hardest to pretend everything was okay, foregoing sleep, just in case others could hear you. You didn't want them to worry, didn't want them to know what you saw. Blood-soaked hands, empty eyes, and screaming. Someone was always screaming. It started 5 months ago. There had been no warning, no cause. One moment you'd spent your nights dreaming about university maths exam, and then the next day, all you could remember was violence. Your mother's priest may be wrong about the demons, but everything you remembered when you woke up, sweaty and panting and scared, was hellish. Every night, you'd see a man, nearly 10 years your senior, fall. You'd see his head collapse inward, blood and brain matter splattering your face. Every night you'd hear a man behind you scream. Every night, you'd lift your head, only to meet a pair of empty blue eyes tucked into a chiseled face. Nightmares. Dr. Harbison's voice tore you out of your memories. Her pen tapped on the corner of her notepad as her dull eyes finally shifted to you. Can you tell me more about them? You didn't want to, but your mother's sharp elbow dug into your side. You swallowed your ire before you said, "It's a war." Because that's what it had to be. You couldn't imagine it being anything else. But you couldn't understand where it would come from.
Nightmares were based on experience, on trauma. Your own research into the subject taught you that much. And you had no reason to be familiar enough with the sight of death to dream of it this constantly. Your family's subsidized town home in Alton was tucked away from chaos. Nothing happened there. Even the ruffians were tame, only a mugging here and there when some tourist traveled outside the town boundary without preparation. Most of your family graduated from university and went straight to work for the factories lining the Hampshire coast. It was the same path you were walking now. A business degree and a living wage. Dr. Harbison appeared to agree, her thick brows arched as she prodded. A war? Her stare flickered over to your mother before her mouth pursed in bemusement. Is there any chance your daughter may have found herself watching a few movies with her friends? As your mother sputtered, a dull ring settled behind your ears. It sounded like gunfire. Of course not. We're a godly family. Your mother's face was reddening now as she hastened to explain. It must be her university. I knew it was a bad idea to allow you to go off on your own. The church preaches against violence of all kinds. That ringing continued inside your head, nothing capable of stopping it. You knew where this conversation was going. It had been the same argument you'd been dragged into since childhood. A fight you'd never learned how to win. Your mother believed a daughter should be submissive, demure, and of healthy-minded body. She believed only a path of godliness could provide you with the future she desired. And in her mind, God was not found in the cold libraries of your public university. It wasn't from a movie. You broke into the conversation, something that tasted like ash built on the back of your tongue. It reminded you of communion. We're going over World War II in my history elective this quarter. Your hands fanned out in suppliance. They could fill in the blanks within your explanation. It was easier that way. They wanted a simple answer and you'd give it to them. With another click of her pen, Dr. Harbison jotted down a line of notes with a pleased smile, as I expected. You tried not to flinch at her victory, even if you swore that just for a moment you could feel a heavy hand rest on your shoulder, feel those calloused fingers squeeze, something hot and wet dripping down your back. She glanced up at you and chuckled. I've dealt with many students like you. University is a stressor and likely the cause of your nightmares. It's common for young adults entering the world, but with one last scribble, she turned her attention back to your mother. It may do your daughter well to move back home for the rest of the quarter, until her stress levels are under control. You didn't listen to the rest of the conversation after that point. It was already out of your control. Instead, your eyes locked on the crucifix that laid against Dr. Harbison's beige wall. You wondered if she realized that it rested off kilter, if she knew that Jesus' feet were slowly being turned to the ceiling. As your mother continued to babble onward about the future appointments and stress management strategies, you took a deep breath. Lemonade lavender flooded your lungs. It tasted like a funeral pyre. You didn't miss your childhood home. The flat you'd shared with your roommates down near your university was small, but it felt more like a home than this place ever did. You had a television, a small bookshelf, and even a cat shared between you and 3 other girls. Chewing on your lower lip, you eyed the room you stood in now, a relic of childhood that had never changed. Your twin bed still lay propped against the corner, your little sister's matching set taking up the other side of the room. A pair of nightstands stood next to each mattress, only a simple lamp and a Bible covering the faux wooden finish. You twisted around, nearly able to touch both sides of the wall as you took in the laundry basket hanging off the back door. It was filled to the brim and the fabric was close to ripping. You imagined that would be your first chore of the night. With a heavy sigh, you dropped your bag on the floor by your bed. It wasn't nearly enough to last you the rest of the semester, but with any hope, your mother would tire of having an extra mouth to feed sooner rather than later. You could already hear her bustling below you in the kitchen. The radio was stuck on her favorite channel, gospel music creeping up the stairs. Sitting on the corner of your old bed, you let your hand trail over the faded pink duvet. Your fingers got caught on the torn hemline and you couldn't stop them from shaking. Your chipped nail polish gleamed under the low light of the approaching sunset, and just for a second, only a second, you wished you could scream. It seemed to always go this way, and you didn't have anyone to blame but yourself. You didn't fight this, didn't argue with your mother as she drove you home from your flat, didn't even shed a tear. You just shoved it all down and accepted it, like you always did. You were the pushover in your family, always been the one to give in, to settle down, to keep the peace between your parents and 5 siblings. University was supposed to change that. It was supposed to be your fresh start. But at the first hint of strife, you'd given in. Eldest daughter syndrome. That's what your roommates called it. Always the one to bleed but never allowed to take. If you trusted Dr. Harbison, you might have shared some of this with her. You didn't though, and you didn't think you ever would. Even though the world was changing, there were too many variables to risk rocking the boat. At least that's what you told yourself. It was easier that way, to convince yourself to behave because even though it wasn't great, you were one of the lucky ones. You had a roof over your head, a scholarship, and friends. There was no room to complain. Your gaze traveled to the untouched Bible sitting on your nightstand with a frown. Things could always be worse. It wasn't like you were the one bleeding out in your dreams. You weren't the one screaming for a fallen friend. You'd never known pain like that, and likely never would. Without really thinking about it, you leaned across the bed to grab the Bible. You eyed the cover with mild disdain. Unlike the rest of your family, you'd never had a strong connection with the divine. It always felt too convenient for you. The promise that sins could be forgotten, that bloody hands would never stain if you chose to devote yourself to a higher being and repent. It didn't seem fair. You'd seen enough in the news to know that some people didn't deserve to be forgiven. Dragging your finger over the cover, you flipped through the thin pages with a frown. Even that felt wrong, like it wasn't your place. It made sense realistically. You didn't have the religious upbringing to care about the divine messages, only knowing of false promises and threats of burning. Still, your hand didn't falter. With the sound of your mother's gospel music reverberating through the walls, you opened the Bible to a random page. The humid air of the European summer settled along the back of your neck. Sweat dripped down your brow as a frustrated noise caught in your throat, skimming through the words you landed upon. If he takes away, who can stop him? Who dares to ask him, what are you doing? You didn't bother to read the rest of the verse. The answers you didn't know you were looking for were already there. There was no point fighting your fate. Closing the Bible, you let it drop onto the duvet cover with a harsh breath. Maybe this was where you needed to be. Maybe the nightmares would fade. Maybe. How tired were you of that word? Leaning back into your bed, you tossed an arm over your eyes and took a deep breath. You tried to survive on your own, and fate had dragged you back without a single scream. That verse only proved it. Without knowing how long you lay there, you allowed yourself to give in to the exhaustion building in your bones. It had sunk up on you over the last week. Through the worried looks of your roommates, appointments with your university counselor, the talks with your dean, and now this. Back home and little more than a child, being forced to run away from her problems. A sleep crept over you, you came to an unsettling realization. Dr. Harvison might be right. It was happening again. Wherever you were was dark and dank. Puddles of murky water and blood dotted the ground. Bodies spilled across the cement. There was a mix of them, some with open mouths and wide eyes, forever staring into the unknown. The others rested with their eyes closed, never capable of seeing the bullet holes buried in their own temples. Then there was the man in front of you, the one who always died. His blue eyes were alight with a fire. A passion you'd never felt, something you imagined would heat your bones from the inside out. His mouth moved, and you caught a scar on his chin for the first time. It was hidden behind the wiry hair of his beard, but the light from a dim bulb above caught his pale skin. A gloved hand, had he always worn gloves, spread through the short tuft of hair on top of his head. You knew you were dreaming, knew this place as well as you knew your own skin, yet you still tried to turn, still tried to follow the cock of the gun behind you, except your body wouldn't cooperate. Everything happened too fast, yet far too slow. Invisible webs held your limbs, sticky yet incapable of breathing. There was some sort of liquid creeping into your lungs and stealing your breath. The man said something you couldn't hear, his eyes locked on a place behind you, your arm stretched out, your mouth opened. Blood landed on your tongue. The man's body dropped, face first into the dirty ground. Gunfire took over the air. Footsteps pounded, a body crashing through yours and landing beside the man bleeding out all over the cold floor. ears ringing, body too hot. You could do nothing more than stand there. The scream of the man forcing your body to wake up. Johnny! Your history professor had blue eyes. They weren't ice blue, not like his, but the resemblance still made you uneasy. Chewing on the end of your pencil, you watched as your professor stalked around the room. He was speaking about the history of tax levies, but you couldn't focus on him. If you looked for too long, were sure you would start hearing the screams. Johnny! The memory made you flinch, and you bit down a bit too hard, the pencil cracked between your teeth. The boy sitting to your left shot you a wide-eyed look, but didn't comment. You appreciated it. Unfortunately, your roommate didn't offer the same courtesy. Hazel, a wild-haired girl you'd been friends with since primary school, peeked at you from under her bangs. You okay? Fine, you muttered, as you took the pencil out of your mouth. Just stressed about the exam. It had been 6 months since your first appointment. 6 months since you screamed bloody murder in the middle of class. You drew your thumb over the battered edge of the pencil, frowning at the empty sheet of paper in front of you. It didn't make sense. You were supposed to be getting better. It wasn't working, though. Even tucked safe and sound at your parents' house, you were still struggling to sleep through the night. It was the same story every time you closed your eyes. Blood, gunshots, and screaming. You didn't think you'd ever be able to forget that man's voice at this point. You sure? Hazel leaned forward, her hair blocking the professor's view of your gossiping. We can sneak you out for a weekend, go up to Manchester. Genevieve has a flat we can stay at. It'll be bloody cold, you forced a smile. Why do you want to go north when we could go south? Flat's free, Hazel retorted, her voice pitched, going a little posh as she sniffed. Spain isn't all that. You know my brother? He knows a bloke who went down there last year and... Ladies, your professor cut the conversation short. May I have your attention? While Hazel sputtered out an apology, you froze in your seat. It wasn't him, you knew that, but your professor's eyes were so damn blue. Your hand crawled to your chest, feeling the pump of blood under your skin as he stared at you. It lasted far longer than you could take, and the whole time a voice you'd never met chanted, Johnny, Johnny, Johnny. You wondered briefly what would happen when you pulled your hand back. Would it be just as bloody as you remembered? You never wanted to go to church. Didn't want to sit in a pew and listen to a man tell you how to live. You tried to pick that Bible up a few more times, hoping something, anything, would make those dreams go away. It had been over a year now, a year of seeing a man you'd never met die. Far too much time to spend trapped in a nightmare knowing you couldn't do anything to fix it. Where things were supposed to get better, they only seemed to go worse. In the past, your nightmares had been shapeless things. They'd been a concept of thoughts and shapes. Now they had claws. There were details you'd never seen before. The man, the one who always died, wore a dog tag. You knew it was bent in the corner, like he chewed on it or used it to pry open a can or time or two. You'd seen his face so many times now you could probably paint each freckle from memory. Your fingers twitched on the pew, nails digging into the cushion as the priest drew out his sermon. You weren't sure what he'd been talking about, couldn't force yourself to pay attention, not when your thoughts continued to travel back to the place that you shouldn't know. Focus! Your mother's sharp elbow hit you on the side. You could do well to pay attention. Without giving her a response, you shot a look to your left. Your mother didn't meet your stare. Her eyes were locked on the altar, fingers clutched tight around the cross she wore on her neck. Just beside her, your 3 little brothers argued amongst themselves while your sister napped. The priest droned on all the while. For since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead comes also through a man, his hand slashed toward the altar. And in his name we say... A chorus of prayer broke out between the pews, whispered, barely audible words that had little meaning to you. Instead, your attention fell toward the altar and a cross wrapped in golden frame, the heavy pressure of a god you rarely worshipped hanging over you like a noose. As the priest continued to speak, you felt a chill sneak its way up your spine. If you looked close enough, you swore you saw the cross move. Dr. Harbison's office hadn't changed much in 2 years. She'd finally splurged on a new pen. Resting your chin on the palm of your hand, you watched her write out her notes. You couldn't help but wonder what she'd listed this time. Maybe she'd finally caved to your mother's demands and recommended an exorcism. Speaking of your mother, she conceded to you attending this session on your own, though not for lack of trying. Thankfully, it was hard for her to continue speaking for you. You were 22 now, nearly done with university, ready to graduate in 3 months. Her helicopter parenting could be overlooked when you were younger, but now it didn't earn her any favors. There were too many questions, too many eyes. She couldn't handle the stain on her reputation. It helped that you'd been able to move back to your flat. Nearly a year after your first appointment, Dr. Harbison and your parents had agreed that you were well enough to live on your own. The nightmares were gone, you were able to sleep through the night, and your mother had been adamant that she needed the extra space. It was probably the only reason you'd stayed sane. Dragging your gaze over the rest of Dr. Harbison's office as she finished up, you couldn't help but hike your brows at the sight of her missing family picture. There was no telling when that had changed. It was still there last time you were here, only a mere 2 months ago. So, Dr. Harbison glanced up. You thought she was smiling, but it was hard to tell. Any changes since we last spoke? You hiked a shoulder as best you could in the stuffy chair. Not really. I met a boy. This time, you were sure she was smiling. Did you? Was this at school or work? They liked it when you acted normal. Liked it when you pretended you weren't still haunted by a stranger's death every night. Your parents and the good doctor preferred it that way, made it easier for them to forget about the details, let them pretend those first couple months when you still woke up screaming never happened. Work. You fiddled with the cracking leather on the chair's arm without making eye contact. He came in during closing, asked for my number. We've got a date next weekend. She made a pleased noise, and you fought not to let the unease eat at you. It had taken a while, longer than you'd like to admit, for you to be comfortable with lying. It wasn't born out of guilt. The opposite, in fact. For as long as you could remember, you'd been a terrible liar, never quite capable of getting yourself comfortable enough to believe your own stories. You'd had plenty of time to learn, though. In the last 2 years, you'd become a professional at faking it. You'd learned to stop flinching at the sight of blue eyes, learned to ignore the pressure on your shoulders that felt suspiciously like hands. You were so good at it now that you could almost believe it yourself. That's great, I'm really happy to hear that. Dr. Harbison took one last note down before she closed her notebook. The action caught your attention. She'd never done that before. Now, I want to get your opinion on something, and I don't want you to feel pressure to agree. Your finger's still on the chair. Yes? In the last 2 years, we've made great progress. Dr. Harbison clicked a manicured nail against the table. That was new too. I've been watching you these last couple of sessions, and it's my professional belief that you've outgrown our appointments. You swallowed the lump building in your throat. We're done? Only if you want us to be. Twisting her legs out, Dr. Harbison brought her arms over her head with a stretch. I'm comfortable with stopping our appointments, but if you don't feel ready— No, you cut in before she could take it back. I do. There was a soft chuckle from the doctor. I thought you'd agree. Personally, her eyes flicked over to yours, and for the first time that day, you noticed that she wasn't wearing her glasses. You could have stopped a while ago, but I wanted to be sure. The dreams you had, that kind of trauma doesn't come out of nowhere. This is where things always got dicey. She'd been trying to get you to admit to more than you were comfortable with for several sessions now. You'd considered it a time ago or two. But the fear of judgment, of Dr. Harbison telling you that your experiences weren't bad enough to be the cause of your troubles, always stopped you. I know, but I really think it was just stress. Everything just changed so fast, You shrugged. I just couldn't handle it myself. That got you a long look. It's not wrong to ask for help. You knew she wasn't trying to instigate, she was just doing her job, but the accusation pulled too close to the surface. Your gaze skimmed over her face, taking in her open expression and wondering for just a second if you should raise your suspicions and ask her about her divorce to get her off your back. You opened your mouth to do just that. Dr. Harbison gave you a fond smile as she stood up and walked around her desk. Her thin hand dropped on your shoulder. You swallowed, the words still bubbling in your throat, taking in her face a new perfume before deciding to hold your tongue. "I know that now," you said instead. "I won't make that mistake again." It was easier to lie anyway. No one came to your graduation. You weren't surprised. Your siblings had school and your father would be working until evening, if not later. Mother might have made it, but you didn't expect her to bother with the drive down to Hampshire. Instead, you found yourself tucked between Hazel and her family, smiling but doing nothing more than watching. A half-drank cup of beer sat in front of you, your fingers drying through the condensation as you listened to the laughter inside the pub. There was a football match on, a rerun of an old game between two teams that you weren't familiar with. Beside you, Hazel leaned on her boyfriend's shoulder, whispering low enough for her father not to catch. "And what about you?" Like, the thought of him summoned his attention. Hazel's father turned his attention to you. "What are your big plans now that school is done?" You stalled. There wasn't an answer to that question because you didn't know. You'd done it by the book, by tradition. You had a degree in business, economics, and a minor in mathematics, but you didn't know where you wanted that to take you. There was no interest to be found in finance, no desire to become an accountant. You tasted blood on your tongue. "I think I'll apply for the military." You didn't know where the thought came from, but as it settled in the air, it felt right. "My great-uncle was in the Navy." It didn't take long for the table to react. Hazel jerked. "The military? You've got a bloody degree. Why would you—" You didn't know how to tell her the truth, how to tell her you'd been haunted by blood for years now, so long that anything else didn't feel true. There was no way you'd be able to sit in a cubicle and work spreadsheets with the knowledge of what it felt like to see a man's life leave his eyes. It could all be a hallucination, a joke, a dream, but it wouldn't leave you, and you'd have to adapt. "Hey now, don't go talking down on a Queen's military," Hazel's brother, a rotund man who worked on the docks, huffed. "I know a good few blokes who loved it. Wouldn't go for the Navy, mind you, but the Army's always been a solid choice." While Hazel puffed out her cheeks, you glanced toward her brother. "You happen to know any of them still hanging around in Hampshire?" The more the idea settled, the more merit it had. You weren't like Hazel. You didn't have a family waiting for you to come home with open arms. You were just another mouth to feed. There was nothing to keep you in the city, and for the first time in 3 years, you felt like you were doing something other than rotting. A right few of them, I'm sure. He ruffled around his pockets to pull out a phone that had seen better days. "Want me to put you in touch?" When you nodded, he took your phone number down. He wouldn't make any promises, stating that they were a busy bunch these days, but he did give you the directions to the nearest recruitment center. You took it all in like a beast starved. Hazel's parents watched with bemusement, and you could feel your roommate's eyes digging into the back of your skull. You knew what they were thinking. The ink on your degree might not even be dry yet, but you were going to do this. The recruitment office was cold. Refrigerated air pumped through the vent above your head, making the papers in your lap ruffle. 2 other boys sat in the lobby with you. They were young, jeans dipping below their hips and hats stuffed in their laps. They were chattering about a new television show, something you hadn't had the time to watch yet, while the attending officer looked over your group with a keen eye. Your hand tapped a beat on your jean-clad thigh. You felt overdressed. You hadn't known the proper attire to wear, so you defaulted to a pair of dark washed denim with a white blouse and sensible heels. It had looked okay enough when you were in your flat, but here, you stood out like a sore thumb. While you waited, the officer called out one of the boys. He was certainly a boy, too. Couldn't be older than 18, with his patchy beard and baby-faced cheeks, giving his friend a parting shake. He walked through the door in the back with the officer at his heels. The only other lad left shot you a confused look before he pulled out his phone, scrolling through a series of videos you could barely hear. You weren't sure how long you sat in silence until the door opened. Turning your head over your shoulder, you took in the new arrival. He was taller than you, a few years older as well, dark-skinned with the beginnings of stubble curling up his sharp cheekbones. Taking in his attire, you doubted he was applying for recruitment. The boots he'd tucked under a pair of light denim jeans were clearly military edition and well used. Removing his jacket, a brown trench coat with a label you couldn't afford, the man took one look at the room and chuckled. It was a pleasant sound, soft and charming, but there was a hint of taunt hiding in the upturn of his growing smirk. Like a bloody ghost town in here. Pulling the ball cap off his head, he perched it on top of the coat rack and asked, "I'm looking for a second Lieutenant Caliph. You lot happen to see him?" Your companion, the teenager with a phone addiction, startled. He just went to the back. You finished the sentence for him. There's a bell on his desk if it's urgent. The newcomer stared at you for several long seconds before his gaze trailed to the desk. You thought his eye might have twitched when he muttered, "That's how we're doing it now? A fucking bell?" Without another word, he stalked across the room and tapped the bell 3 times in a row. The gesture was surprisingly gentle if you ignored the way his eyes rolled skyward at the action. You fought not to let your mouth smile when the bell went unanswered and the man turned his glare toward the door. He grumbled something unkind under his breath before his full attention fell back to you and your companion. Corporal Garrick, if you're wondering. Perching his elbows against the desk, and the newcomer, Garrick, let his eyes travel over you before settling on the boy to your left. "You two waiting for your friend, or are you here to enlist?" When your recruitment buddy didn't immediately answer, you dared to glance at him. You weren't sure who was more frustrated by the sight of his face shoved into the phone screen. 10 seconds passed without him so much as blinking. Practically feeling Corporal Garrick's frown, you sucked in an annoyed breath. You hadn't wanted to be the main point of conversation, but it appeared you had no other choice. "We're both trying to enlist," you said before you caught yourself adding a tactful but late "sir." Dark eyes flickered back to you before Garrick grinned. "I appreciate it, but I'm not in uniform. You don't have to call me sir just yet." Apparently giving up on the other inhabitant of the room, Garrick twisted his body to face you. "Know what kind of position you're looking for?" You hadn't thought it through too far, but it was easy enough to answer. "Intelligence, sir." It seemed foolish to attempt anything else. You weren't a fighter, and you had no desire to find yourself wrapped up in logistics. "There you go again, making me feel old." Garrick shook his head. It would have been a fond gesture if it weren't for the way his eyes skimmed over your body, not in a leering way, more assessing than anything. Almost calculating, even. "Well, good luck. If you ever feel up to transferring to combat, we're always looking for new faces." His smile twisted into a teasing grin, especially new faces who aren't still wet behind the ears. Like he was sharing an inside joke, he tilted his head to the boy scrolling through his phone. You didn't have time to offer anything more than a chuckle. The door to the back rocked open. The boy who'd been escorted back for the first time stomped into the lobby with a red face. It clearly hadn't gone well. You didn't hear what he muttered to his friend, but it must have been bad news, because before you could blink, both of the boys were marching out of the front door. As the door slammed shut, Garrick whistled. "And only one remains." "Shut it, Garrick." Caliph, you assumed, rubbed at his face. Tired eyes peered down at you from between tan fingers. "Look, let's cut to the chase here. You haven't been arrested in the last 6 months, have you?" You opened your mouth, only to pause, glancing warily at Garrick, still tucked by the desk. He only grinned at you. That settled that, then. He didn't seem keen on moving, and you didn't think you'd had the right to tell him to do so. Fiddling with the papers in your hands, you slowly shook your head. "No criminal records. Education requirements are fine too. I brought my university transcript." With another wary glance at Garrick, you mentioned the only thing that might cause you problems. "I visited a mental health specialist for a few years for stress, but I have her contact information if you have any questions." Garrick's brow arched, but Caliph let out a relieved sigh. "Perfect. You'll fill everything out?" When you nodded, he took the papers and moved back behind the desk. "Next step will be the assessment. Someone will contact you in the next 24 hours. Before you could acknowledge him, Garrick popped back into the conversation. "A degree? What did you study?" "Economics and mathematics," you answered automatically. Both men looked at you, and your shoulders hiked up in an uneasy shrug. "It seemed to be the best option for whatever I wanted to work." That explanation didn't appear to clear anything, judging by the way Caliph continued to stare at you. He
He flipped through the paperwork for a few seconds before he hummed. You briefly heard the scratch of a... But he didn't mention anything to you as you wrote his notes out. You've got yourself a smart one there. Garrick tapped the desk with 4 fingers before he shot you a grin. Might need to look into her down the line. Caliph scoffed. Keep your hands to yourself, Corporal. Get your own recruit. Well, that's half the reason I'm here. With one last smile in your direction, Garrick turned around to lean over the desk and state, Need a couple of files from last year. Anything you've got dated 2015. I can give you details later, but it's an order from Bryce. An awkward air fell between the two men as Caliph nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing it with a swallow. You didn't miss the way Garrick zeroed in on the pause, eyes tracking the way Caliph paused just for a second too long. You hovered for half a second before convincing yourself that it was none of your business. With the two men distracted, you decided to excuse yourself. Everything was done, and the only thing left to do was wait. Standing, you brushed your blouse off, trying and failing to suddenly sneak out of the room. It did no good. Even with Caliph distracted, Garrett caught your movement. His eyes traced over your face before you slipped out of the exit and had just enough time to notice his smile disappear before the doors closed behind you. You wanted to look into it, but again, none of this was your business. A chill settled over your arms as you made your way back through the humid air of England's summer. No one greeted you when you walked into your flat. There was half a container of leftover curry tucked in the back of the refrigerator. That would be the only celebration you allowed yourself. You chose to finish it off with a beer, letting the whole situation finally sink in for the first time. It was official now. You'd done it. You'd successfully decided to do something on your own. Something you wanted. Something that didn't fit the mold. Didn't fit the person everyone was convinced you were. A giddy smile cracked across your face as you sat at the empty dinner table, nursing your now lukewarm beer. Sure, there might not have been anyone to commiserate with, but you didn't need it. For once, you thought it was going to end up being okay, even if you swore you'd heard Garrick's voice before. That was my reading of A Heretic's Gospel, Chapter 1. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in Chapter 2 very soon. Huge shout out to lavendertownes for this video concept and format. Her channel will be linked in the description along with the original story on AO3. Please go check it out. I am obsessed with this fanfic. Bye bye!